This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one website platform. More about them later in the video. Before there was social media, streaming services, and almost unlimited options on television and handheld devices, entertainment options were few. The generation known as the baby boomers and their offspring in the late 20th century relied on, among other sources, books, magazines, and comics to help them while away leisure time, and in many cases to distract them from the tortures of the classroom. One of the most popular sources of distraction was a magazine. Not quite a comic book, but not a publisher of informative articles either. Especially popular with teenage boys, Mad Magazine was like no other periodical to be found. Mad began as a comic book, published by Educational Comics, known as EC Comics. It was founded by two men, editor Howard Kurtzman and EC's publisher William Gaines. The latter was born into the publishing industry and remained as the publisher of Mad for the next 4 decades. Though his father had been a publisher, Gaines was not trained in the business, instead studying at New York University to become a chemistry teacher. Despite his lack of experience, under his direction, Mad reached a circulation of 2.4 million at its peak. Under Gaines's leadership, Mad produced books of reprints of several features and spawned numerous imitators, including Cracked Magazine, the television programs Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, and Mad TV, a motion picture called Up the Academy, and an off-Broadway production called The Mad Show. Under Gaines, the staff of the magazine called themselves the usual gang of idiots on the magazine's masthead, and established a reputation of irreverent satire, parody, and often adolescent humor, which we're fans of here. Over the decades, Mad endured lawsuits over copyright infringement, often as a result of its parodies, its mascot, Alfred E. Newman, and its use of images, including several Star Wars characters. Gaines saw the magazine through them all, continuing as its publisher until his death in 1992. Through his run as publisher of the magazine, he developed the reputation of being somewhat of an eccentric. Here is his story. Welcome back to Biographics. I'm your host, Eric Malachite, and today's script was provided by Larry Holsworth, so be sure to show him some love in the comments as you deploy your likes and pay tribute to the eldritch beast that is the YouTube algorithm. Let's get to it. William Gaines was born on March 1st, 1922. His father was Max Gaines, who had changed the family name from Ginsberg. The elder Gaines had been a teacher, a factory worker, and a clothing salesman, among other pursuits, before taking a job at a printing company in New York. Among the company's products were 4-color comic strips for Sunday newspapers. Gaines hit upon the idea of using the color comics format in bound volumes for use as promotional items. In 1938, Gaines and a partner founded All American Comics, publishing original material. Among the characters created by All American were Green Lantern and the first female superhero, Wonder Woman. Yet his fortunes were not consistent, and his frequent business problems as well as his own somewhat bitter nature did not exactly translate to a happy home life. His son, William Gaines, later summed up his youth by saying that his father expected the worst from his son and was rarely disappointed. William Gaines, who went by Bill, reported he endured both physical and emotional abuse during his youth and remembered his father's exasperation with him, which frequently led him to being told he would never amount to anything. Max Gaines eventually sold his interest in All American, opting to become a gym rat instead, which is a joke. He actually invested the money he attained in a new comics company which he called Educational Comics. The company focused on the publication of illustrated Bible stories, historical events, and fables. Meanwhile, Bill completed his education in New York and entered New York University, intent on studying chemistry and obtaining a teaching certificate. And his plan at the time was to teach high school chemistry. Throughout his childhood, he showed little interest in the publishing world and had no intention of following in his father's footsteps. But any plans he actually had to be put on hold because World War II intervened. Bill found himself in the U.S. Army Air Corps, where he was trained as a photographer. The AAC then, with typical bureaucratic oversight, stationed him near Oklahoma City, where no photographic facilities existed. Without a need for the duties that the AAC had trained him for, he was assigned to the mess facilities as a kitchen worker, a position known in the Army as KP, short for Kitchen Police. The position had nothing to do with law enforcement, though. Servicemen on KP duty assist the cooks by peeling potatoes, slicing vegetables, washing dishes, pots and pans, and any other mundane duties assigned to the cooks. They also have access to the choicest cuts of meat, the freshest bread, fruit, vegetables, and other goodies. Bill Gaines, already somewhat overweight, took advantage of his position by eating very well. He was later assigned to the duties he had been trained for at Governor's Island in New York, where he took advantage of its proximity to Brooklyn by enrolling at Brooklyn Polytechnic Institute. Upon his discharge in 1946, he transferred to NYU, continuing his studies in chemistry. And they were interrupted again in 1947. Max Gaines was on a boating expedition at Lake Placid, New York on August 20th when the boat he was on collided with another. Max was killed in the accident. The company Max had created and sold All-American Comics eventually merged with a competitor, National Publications, and became DC Comics, one of the most successful comics publishers of all time. The company he left to his son, however, Educational Comics, was on the brink of collapse. Without any experience or training in publishing, Bill Gaines found himself as co-owner with his mother and publisher of EC. As the 1940s came to an end, he dropped several titles, changed the company's name from Educational Comics to Entertaining Comics, and centered on genres including crime, horror, westerns, and most importantly for his future, humor. The new comics sold well, and EC's share of the market grew as the 1950s began. If you want your business to be as iconic as Mad Magazine was, then you're going to need a snazzy website, and the sponsor for today's video, Squarespace, has you covered. Squarespace is the all-in-one website platform, perfect for entrepreneurs and hobbyists alike. Recently, I needed to make a simple website for a tabletop RPG I'm developing and playtesting to make looking through the rulebook a lot easier. And it was beyond simple to add sections, format, and even incorporate my existing knowledge of CSS and HTML, though you don't need any knowledge in that area at all. And it's all thanks to Squarespace's innovative Fluid Engine. The Fluid Engine makes it easier than ever for pretty much anyone to dive in and make a beautiful website. Answer a few questions about the goals you'd like to accomplish with your site, choose a template, and get dragging and dropping elements onto your template. Drag and drop technology is included in every Squarespace site. But that's not all, because if you're working on a long-term project like the tabletop RPG I just mentioned, Squarespace makes it easy for you to create members-only content for your community. Monetize your projects by selling access to online courses, blogs, videos, and memberships. Start with a fully customizable website and earn recurring revenue by gating your content behind a paywall. Simply set the price and choose whether to charge a one-time fee or a subscription for access. And then you can use Squarespace email campaigns to make it easy for you to spread the word about your project, engage with clients, promote your services, and grow your business. Plus, if you're as busy as I am, you can even set up email automations to stay connected, nurture leads, and save time. Ready to get started? Head to squarespace.com/biographics for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, use offer code biographics to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Now back to the video. In the early 1950s, EC introduced numerous new comic titles, including among them Tales from the Crypt, Two-Fisted Tales, The Haunt of Fear, Panic, and others. When one of his editors, Howard Kurtzman, approached Bill for a raise, Gaines replied that he might be able to earn one by creating a new humor title. Kurtzman came up with Mad. The comic book version of Mad carried the motto on its cover of humor in a jugular vein. The initial idea behind Mad was that of a parody, with the new comic creating spoofs of existing comic lines and characters. The first issue appeared in 1952 and did not sell well. Sales of the next two issues were likewise weak. With the fourth issue, written almost entirely by Kurtzman, a parody titled Super Duper Man spoofed Superman, Captain Marvel. No, not that one, actually the dude who's currently been called Shazam, and a lawsuit which had been brought against Fawcett Comics by national periodicals over copyright infringement. It led to the first threat of lawsuit directed toward Mad, though Bill chose to ignore the threat, which never materialized. Meanwhile, the comics industry came under fire. The early 1950s saw comics come under attack for being a major contributor to the perceived increase in juvenile delinquency in America. Frederick Wortham published a book titled Seduction of the Innocent, which purportedly established a link between comic books and juvenile crime, as well as truancy, sexual activity like homosexuality, and declining church attendance. And it's worth it to note that he was full of shit and based all of his research off of a fabricated study. In response to public pressure, Congress called for hearings into the industry. In 1954, Gaines was called to testify before the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Juvenile Delinquency. Under questioning by Tennessee Senator Estes Kefauver, Bill denied the cover of a recent issue of one of EC's comics' crime suspense stories was in bad taste. The testimony was printed in part by the New York Times and reprinted in newspapers across the country. The cover, which featured a man holding the head of a recently beheaded woman, a bloody axe in his other hand, was described in the testimony, with Kefauver observing, "You've got blood coming out of her mouth." Gaines, who had already noted that he was limited only by the bounds of good taste, replied, "A little." The public reaction to the testimony and to other similar accounts led the comics industry to establish boundaries determined by factors beyond a publisher's opinion of what was or was not good taste. The industry created the Comics Code Authority, which artists and publishers absolutely despised. But it was a step to self-regulate their publications and appease the disapproval of the public. The reaction was also in part taken to appease distributors, many of which had yielded to pressure and refused to carry what they believed were dangerous publications. The creation of the Comics Code Authority did what its creators intended, at least for the most part. It prevented action by Congress and allowed the publishers to regulate themselves. But it only applied to comic books, not to magazines, and in that manner led to the creation of what became Mad Magazine. In 1992, Bill Gaines denied that Mad had changed its format to evade the requirements of the code, though he did admit that the change of format allowed it to ignore the code, which is really funny. In the 1950s, EC gradually dropped all of its comic book lines, and though it started several different magazines, only Mad survived. And with its change of format, Mad thrived. Howard Kurtzman had already been lobbying to convert Mad into a magazine format before Gaines testified before the Senate subcommittee, according to Gaines. He later related that Kurtzman had received an offer from another magazine, and in order to retain the editor, Gaines allowed him to pursue the idea. By late 1955, 23 issues of Mad had been published in comic book format. Accordingly, the first issue of Mad in magazine form appeared with number 24 on its masthead. Gaines had put all of his eggs in one basket, so to speak, with most of his comics and their lurid covers dropped. He had no experience publishing in the magazine format and wisely allowed Kurtzman to run the show, though Bill retained approval authority for business operations and magazine content. Kurtzman chose to print Mad on higher quality paper than what was normally used for comics at the time, which was newsprint. He also dropped the hand lettering typical of comics and opted for typeset printing, selecting a Brooklyn-based high-quality magazine printer. The comic book version of Mad had been printed on presses used for newspapers, because, newsprint goes with, The first edition in the magazine format proved an immediate success, so much so that demand created the need for a second printing after it appeared in July 1955. However, within months, despite the success of Mad, EC was in danger of shutting down. Mad was soon the company's sole publication, though others were tried and dropped. Debts incurred before shutting down EC's other publications threatened its survival, despite increasing sales of Mad with each issue. It took a loan from Gaines's mother and another from the publisher himself to keep Mad in operation. Nonetheless, the shift to black and white format and the higher quality of printing allowed for finer detail in the artwork published in the magazine, attracting more and better artists and contributors. The shift also allowed a wider variety of parodies, leading Mad to adopt the format from sources as diverse as Look magazine and its photo essays, or Popular Mechanics' do-it-yourself style. As much as it pains me to say, being a fan of comics, such parodies were not possible in the limited comic book format. Gaines took advantage of the failure of the magazine's distributor, Leader News, to make a deal with American News Company, which gave the magazine a much wider distribution network. Mad sales continued to grow, yet Kurtzman's management style and his delays meeting deadlines meant too much time elapsed between issues going to press. By late 1956, it was appearing about once every 3 months. In 1956, Playboy publisher Hugh Hefner, himself a former cartoonist, met with Kurtzman. Whether Hefner offered the Mad editor a job or not is unknown, though Kurtzman implied to Gaines that he had. Kurtzman demanded 51% of Mad, giving himself both business and editorial control of the magazine. Gaines said no, though he did offer his editor 10% of the magazine. Kurtzman, unable to gain the control he wanted, left the magazine. He then recruited nearly all of the staff he had hired for Mad to join him at a new magazine to be published by Hefner under the title, as unbelievable as it sounds in 2025, of Trump. It was canceled after just 2 editions. Hugh Hefner commented, "I gave Howard Kurtzman an unlimited budget, and he exceeded it. Al Feldstein had, like his boss, Bill Gaines, little experience in the day-to-day operation of a magazine. He had been part of EC's comics line since 1948, starting as an artist and eventually as an editor for several titles. Bill Gaines, feeling he had been betrayed by Kurtzman, knew and trusted Feldstein, and tapped him to replace the former editor as the head of Mad. Feldstein would hold the position for the next 29 years, in essence creating what Mad became and introducing most of its signature features. Accurate circulation rates for Mad at the time of the changeover to Feldstein are unavailable, but most estimates are in the ballpark of 300 to 400,000. Within 6 years, it was over 1 million, and by the 1970s, it was over 2 million. It was under Feldstein that Gaines and Mad became a publishing juggernaut, and despite its position of being able to charge large advertising fees, it still refused to advertise. Revenues came solely from sales of the magazine, reprint books, and its own marketing merchandise. Feldstein's first issue as editor was 29. It saw the first appearance in the magazine of Don Martin, who would eventually become known as Mad's maddest artist. He would also much later become embroiled in a dispute with Bill Gaines over compensation for his work, leading him to abandon Mad and, for a time, work with the competing magazine Cracked. Nearly all of Mad under Gaines was produced by freelancers, with a flat rate per page offered for their work. Ownership of rights for future publications, such as in reprint books, calendars, merchandise, and so forth, was retained by Mad. The magazine was almost entirely a freelance publication controlled by Bill Gaines. Gaines earned a reputation within the industry of paying his writers and artists promptly, often personally writing the check and handing it to the recipient upon receiving the work. Such promptness in compensation was rare for the industry, with numerous other periodicals not paying for work until it was actually published. And even then, weeks could ensue before the writer or artist saw their money. Yet Gaines also developed a reputation of being somewhat miserly. He balked at increasing page rates, even for his most established writers, and disputes with contributors over the rights to characters and images were frequent. Editors and other staff who sought raises went first to Feldstein, who would offer his support if he felt it was warranted before sending the supplicant to the publisher. One staffer recounted the story that his request to Gaines for a raise of just $3 a week was turned down, but the publisher offered to take him to dinner of all things. When the cost of the dinner exceeded the annual value of the denied raise, the staffer pointed out the fact to his boss. Gaines replied, "I like good conversation and good food. I don't enjoy giving raises." It was during the 1960s under Feldstein that Mad achieved its greatest success, both in sales and in its reputation for biting satire. As the counterculture grew in America with the war in Vietnam, the civil rights movement, the feminist movement, the hippie culture, and more, Mad grew with them. It also skewered them. By then, Bill Gaines no longer had much say in the production of the magazine, its editorial content, or its management, though he retained his position as publisher in its offices on Madison Avenue in New York. In 1961, Premier Industries, a manufacturer of window treatments with no other interests in publishing, purchased Mad from Bill Gaines. As part of the sales agreement, Gaines retained his title as publisher and his final approval of all decisions regarding the content of the magazine and its operations. The sale did not change Mad's practice of avoiding advertising within its pages. The magazine changed hands, as it were, several times subsequent to Gaines selling it. In 1964, it was acquired by a division of National Periodical Publications, making it a sister publication to DC Comics, also owned by National. National Periodical later purchased Warner Brothers, and 3 years later reorganized, becoming Warner Communications. Bill remained on hand as publisher, though he gradually exerted less and less control over the content of the magazine, leaving it to the staff. Mad continued to be a predominantly freelance publication, though many of its contributors appeared in nearly every issue. One of the more prominent features was Spy vs. Spy, an entirely wordless comic strip in which two spies, one dressed in white, the other in black, engaged each other using various nefarious devices and plots. Come on, who didn't love Spy vs. Spy? Seriously. The strip spoofed both the Cold War and the popular spy genre in film and literature. The popular feature first appeared in 1961, drawn by Antonio Prohius. Prohius continued to draw the strip until 1987. Subsequent appearances were drawn by several different creators. Eventually, the spies appeared in trading cards, a television series, and in video games. And it was one of Bill Gaines' favorite features. Gaines saw his role as publisher being one of protecting the magazine's content from the influence of the corporate structure which owned it. He was a long-standing opponent of censorship of any kind, and strove to protect the content of the magazine from outside attempts to control it. One of his objections to advertising was the perception that the advertiser would, by paying fees to the magazine, consider itself protected from satire affecting its image. Mad did advertising during its days as a comic book and in the first years of its publication in the magazine format. At the same time, it introduced false ads run as parodies. In order to allow readers to discern the difference, Mad included the words real advertisement in those which were, in fact, paid advertisements. Bill Gaines explained the magazine's position on advertising in many different interviews. Both Kurtzman and Feldstein disagreed with their boss, the latter going so far as to recommend that Mad open an in-house advertising agency. Gaines remained unbending on the subject. Most advertisers want to appear in a magazine that's loaded with color and has super slick paper, he told an interviewer. He pointed out that creating a package to attract advertisers led to higher production costs. Subsequent loss of advertising would leave the publisher with less revenue, but still with the higher costs. Instead, the magazine ran numerous fake ads over the years, particularly in the 1960s. Among the ads they ran, most of which were full page and unlike the rest of the magazine in color, were ads for a 1963 3/4 Edsel, manufactured by the Edsel division of Ford Motors, an ad for a non-existent boot polish named Aspire Bootlick, which pictured a sailor licking a naval officer's boots, and one parodying Playboy magazine's What Kind of Man Reads Playboy with What Sort of Man Reads Mad. Bill Gaines' health began to fail during the 1980s, though he continued to report to his post at the magazine, then located at 485 Madison Avenue in New York. Whenever the address was printed in the magazine, it was stylized as Madison to match the publication's masthead. Long a gourmand who loved fine dining, he was a distinctive character with long flowing hair and beard, which whitened as he aged, and an expansive waistline. He was married 3 times, the first to his second cousin in an arranged marriage. After that marriage ended in divorce in the late 1940s, he remarried a second time in 1955. That marriage produced 3 children before it too ended in divorce in 1971. He married for the 3rd time in 1987 to Anne Griffiths and remained with her until his death. In his late 60s, his health declined further, and a pacemaker helped him remain active. He continued to work at the magazine, though by the end he only reviewed the completed issue just before it was sent out to the printers. He told an interviewer that his staff created the magazine, and his role was one of setting and maintaining the atmosphere. He did so through extensive practical jokes, elaborate lunches and dinners, and occasional trips for the entire staff, including freelancers who had met an established annual page count for publication. He was very strict about the page count. Coming close wasn't good enough. William Gaines died in his sleep at home in New York on June 3, 1992. The magazine he founded continued into the 21st century. In 2017, Mad relocated its offices to California, though nobody from the New York staff went along with the move. The entirely new staff in California led to a change in the tone of the magazine, though it continued to publish the work of many of the freelancers who had contributed to it in New York. In 2018, Mad ceased widespread newsstand distribution, though it has since reappeared at select sites. Since that time, most editions have consisted of reprints of articles from its long history. It maintains a website hosted by DC Comics and prints annual editions exclusively for Barnes & Noble, with the latest edition labeled as Mad Treasure Trove of Trash Volume 10. An example of its current humor can be found with a claim that you'll laugh your butt off, spelling butt as B-U-T-T-E. The last edition of the original Mad carried number 550 with the cover date of April 2018. Subsequent publications began renumbering, with the most recent as of January 2025 being number 41. So it is detached from the magazine founded by Bill Gaines. Mad's influence has been felt for decades. In 2007, the Los Angeles Times ran an article by writer Robert Boyd in which he asserted, "All I really need to know I learned from Mad magazine." Film critic Roger Ebert credited Mad's film parodies with giving him the necessary tools to review a movie, writing in the foreword to Mad About the Movies, I did not read the magazine, I plundered it for clues to the universe. Jerry Seinfeld, whose own TV series was parodied by Mad in 1997, said of the magazine, "You read it and you're going, these people don't respect anything." And you know, Bill Gaines probably would have laughed his butt off at that. I hope you learned something today, and if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to deploy your likes, comment a historical figure we haven't covered yet, subscribe and ring that bell, and share this video with someone who loves learning about historical figures. I'm Eric Malachite, and we'll see you next time.